What's up? It's now 11:15 on Saturday morning, and I'm finally on my way to Carowinds from Durham, North Carolina, where I stayed the night. Late last night, I passed into North Carolina from Virginia on my way from Busch Gardens, and I've had a few delays this morning, which, not necessarily expected, but in some ways planned for. I'm not going to let it bother me too much because I'm still going to have plenty of time at Carowinds today, because Carowinds is the only park I'm going to today. I'll probably get there sometime around between 1 and 2, probably like 1:30ish I'll get there. And it's open until 10 o'clock tonight. So, if I stay till close, that's still plenty of time. I mean, that's about, looking at about 8 to 9 hours. And, so I want to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about planning trips, because this delay came up and it reminded me of, the process of planning trips and how things always come up that you can't necessarily plan for, and certain things are bound to happen. So planning this trip, I talked a little bit about what my plan for this trip was, and essentially I'm doing 5 parks in 4 days, which requires hundreds of miles of driving. I don't know exactly how many miles of driving it will involve when it's all said and done. Right now I'm at 686 miles, which is a lot. And I did 2 parks yesterday. I did King's Dominion and Busch Gardens, Williamsburg. And today is both the most crucial day of the trip, and one of the, if not the, logistically, the most difficult to pull off. Maybe not so much logistically, but just in terms of the amount of time I have to get where I'm going, do what I'm going to do, and get to the next place. So last night I arrived pretty late at my hotel. I didn't get there until about 1:45 a.m., which, is a little bit later than I was planning on getting there, because it always takes a little bit longer to leave a park, especially if you're leaving, if you're staying to the park until it closes, like your last ride is when the park closes, or you're walking out of the park technically after it's closed. You do have to, take that into account. Busch Gardens closed, quote unquote closed, at 10 o'clock last night. But I probably didn't leave the parking lot. I probably didn't get in my car and leave the parking lot until about 10:30. And there's always things that you have to do whenever you're doing a trip like this, where, that involves hours worth of driving on either end of a visit to a park, such as get gas, stop for snacks or drinks or whatever you need to make sure that you can make your drive as comfortably and as efficiently as possible to the next place. So I didn't really arrive to my hotel until, almost 2 in the morning, which I was initially planning to get there by a little bit closer to 1, but, it's fine. It's not a huge deal. And that involved, a little over 2 hours, 2.5 hours of driving from Busch Gardens to my hotel. I stopped once for food, and got to my hotel, and unfortunately the lady that was working at the front desk took forever. I mean, maybe 10, maybe even 15 minutes to actually show up at the front desk when I got into the hotel. So I couldn't even check in until, pretty much 2 o'clock. And then, yesterday I was talking about how I didn't really have enough space on my phone to like make as many videos as I wanted to, which, you know, is kind of my own fault. I didn't really plan on making these videos. I didn't really plan on making as many videos as I'm making. It was kind of like a spur of the moment decision as I was leaving, that I wanted to kind of document this trip and kind of document my visits to these parks and spend some time talking about some things. So I really didn't get a whole lot of sleep. I got just about maybe not necessarily the minimum, but close to the minimum amount of sleep that I'm comfortable getting to pull off a day like I'm about to have. And all things said and done, I'm about maybe an hour and a half behind the schedule that I wanted to be. But that's okay, because when I plan my trip, you know, when you plan a trip like this, you have to take into account what the best case scenario and what the worst case scenario is, in terms of how much time you're going to have to do certain things. And you have to take steps to make everything on your trip as efficient as possible. You want to, everything that you do on your trip, in terms of like logistics and traveling, and really just everything that you do on your trip, needs to set you up for what you're about to do next on your trip. And what I mean by that is, like, whenever you're, you know, the first step of planning the trip is you decide where you're trying to go. In this case, the whole point of the trip is to go to Carowinds and ride Fury 325, which is what I'm doing today, which is super exciting. And so I live about 13 hours away from Carowinds. And Carowinds is the furthest park on this trip. And you first have to decide, well, are you going to drive or are you going to fly? Well, for me, I don't really have money to be buying a plane ticket and to be renting a car and doing all that. And it's about 13 hours, which, you know, I think probably a safe bet for determining whether or not you're going to drive is maybe about a 12-hour threshold of, if the park is significantly more than 12 hours away from you, you should probably fly, unless you have plenty of other things along the way. If it's less than 12 hours, it's a pretty safe bet to drive. You have to look at how much time you have to make the trip. In the case of this trip, I sort of planned, I knew I wanted to do this trip. I knew when I wanted to do this trip in terms of like the dates that I was going to be gone. I didn't decide the timeline of the trip. I didn't decide exactly what the trip was going to be until about a couple weeks ago. Which part of that has to do with just my circumstances, my life circumstances with work and school and money and stuff like that. I couldn't really do too many preparations until a certain point in time. But yeah, so I didn't get a whole lot of sleep. I got enough sleep. And, you know, something you have to take into account, you know, the whole plan for today is, well, I want to be at Carowinds as long as I can, or I want to at least be able to be at Carowinds for as long as I can, to set up for a worst case scenario where things are closed, you have to wait for them to open, or it takes a long time to get into the park, or, you know, just whatever circumstances that can come up that can prevent me from getting all the things done that I want to do. I've never been to Carowinds before. This is my first time going to Carowinds. And I want to get everything done. I want to ride all the roller coasters. They'll all be completely new credits for me, which is super exciting. I'm super excited about today. And it's a pretty good sized park, you know. They got, something like 12, 14 roller coasters. I'm not really sure exactly what the number is off the top of my head. But yeah, I want to have time to do everything in the park. You know, the minimum goal is ride Fury 325 and ride everything else in the park, at least all the roller coasters in the park, at least once. And if I do that, I will have accomplished everything I want to do. So you have to think, okay, well, what am I trying to accomplish? What kind of day am I going to be going on? Today's a Saturday. and it's the Saturday before Labor Day, so it's a holiday weekend. I don't really know. I've never really been to parks on Labor Day weekend before, so I don't really know typically what the crowds are like. I would imagine, in my mind, there's two scenarios. It's either going to be really, really bad. It's going to be really, really busy because it's a holiday weekend and it's a Saturday, and it's kind of the end of the summer, and people are getting in last-minute trips, doing some last-minute things before they have to start school or busy work season or whatever they have going on. So I figured it's going to be either really heavy or it's going to be really, really light because, school may have already started. I don't really know what their school schedule's like in the Carolinas, but school may have already started. People may have already started the busy season of work and can't really get time away, or they've already taken, their summer trips that they want to do and things that they want to do. So I don't really know. I don't really know if it's going to be super busy today or if it's going to be super light today. But I planned for the worst. I planned for the worst case scenario, and I went ahead and bought Fastlane Plus. Now, normally I wouldn't. I'm the kind of person, I go to enough parks and I go to enough parks frequently enough to where I typically don't buy a fast lane or a fast pass or a flash pass or a quick queue, whatever you want to call it, at the park that you're going to. And unless it's a brand new park and I'm going to be there on a busy day, which is potentially what it's going to be like today at Carowinds, and I may have time constraints. In that case, yeah, I would definitely consider buying it. And I'm also in the opinion normally that you should wait until you get to a park and see what it's like before you go ahead and buy a fast lane. But again, planning ahead for time constraints, I'm at this point, I'm probably going to get to the park at 1:30, 2 o'clock, probably closer to 1:30. And if it's super, super busy, people may have already went ahead and bought their flash passes for the day, and they may already be sold out. And I don't want that to happen, because then that's the absolute worst case scenario. You're there on a super busy day, and you actually are able to buy a flash pass, but you can't because they're all sold out. So I went ahead and took a risk and bought a flash pass. Because, not flash pass, sorry, fast lane, Cedar Fair, it's fast lane. I went ahead and bought it because I want to guarantee myself the potential to have the most fun and have the most time to do the things I want to do by cutting all the lines short. We'll see kind of throughout the day whether or not it ended up being a good decision for me to go ahead and buy that, because it is expensive. But, I have a Platinum Pass, so I'm not paying for parking, I'm not paying for entrance to the park. Basically, it's like I bought a fast lane instead of buying a ticket. Like most people would have to buy a ticket, I bought a fast lane instead. And, Fury 325, I want to be able to ride that thing as many times as I can, because I don't know when I'm going to get back to Carowinds. I may be back next year because I want to go to a couple other parks nearby, but I don't know. It's unknown at this point. So I went ahead and bought it. So that's one thing I did. So I knew that even if I was late getting there in the morning, which I am, I would, at least have that option to help the day go easier. Another thing you want to do is, like, whenever you're buying hotels, you have to consider, like, where you want to stay. A lot of people like to stay, next to the park that they're going to, which makes a lot of sense. If you're going to one park and you're going to stay there for a couple days, then yeah, of course you want to get a hotel that's close to your park. But if you have a budget restraint, or if you are traveling between parks kind of overnight like I'm doing, you want to stay, you have two options. You can go ahead and stay, it's better to stay closer to the park that you're going to the next day than it is to stay close to the park that you just came from, because that way, like, it may be a brutal drive at night whenever you're tired and you left the park and you've been at the park all day and you're really, really tired. But you get to your hotel and you can go to sleep, and then you can get up the next day and you're close to the park that you want to be at, and so you can sleep in a little bit. You can afford to have a little bit more time to kind of get around in the morning before you get to your park. That's more or less what I did the first night. I drove all the way from New York to Fredericksburg, Virginia, which is about an hour, a little less than an hour actually, away from Kings Dominion, which is where I started the day. And it was rough. I mean, I drove about 7 hours after a full day of work and school. So I didn't get there until about 1 o'clock. But I got to sleep in a little bit because Kings Dominion didn't open until 10:30, and I was only about 45 minutes away. And I'm not the kind of person, I typically don't get to a park when it opens. I typically get there, I try to get there like a little bit after it opens, like maybe within an hour or two of when it opens, just so that I have enough time in the day. But I mean, I don't need to be at a park for 12 hours. I mean, I like to stay till close. Personally, and I'll go ahead and go on sort of a side note here. My opinion about parks, the absolute best hour to be at a park is the hour before it closes. I think it's even better than being there when it opens, because when it opens, there are lots and lots of people that are going to get to the park when it opens because they want to be there. They're thinking, okay, well, if I get there when it opens, there's not going to be a whole lot of people there in the morning, and I'm going to get to be able to get on things that have long lines early in the day before they get really long lines. Well, to me, there's a couple of problems that I have with that. First of all, like, in order to really actually do that, you have to get to the park like probably about 30 minutes before it actually opens, if not longer, because there's going to be people that are doing the same thing as you, and there's going to be a long line of cars to even get into the parking lot. And then once you park, you have to go to the front, and there's going to be long lines of people waiting to get into the park because it's not open yet. That's going to happen. So basically, like, you have to waste upwards of 30 minutes to an hour before you actually get to do anything at all. And then you get in the park and you're basically stuck in this mob of people that, unless you got there like unless you're like one of the first ones to even get to the park in the parking lot, and to be at the front of the mob of people, you're going to be in a mob of people, and chances are they're trying to go to the same place as you. If you did the same research that they did and decide, okay, well, I'm going to go to the best ride in the park before the park opens because I want to get there before the line gets long. Chances are everybody's going to go to that same ride. I mean, there are ways around it. You could go to like a secondary ride and then go to that ride after that crowd kind of moves. But basically, you're dealing with a situation where right when the park opens, yeah, you may get a walk-on, but immediately after that, the time after that, things are only going to get busier and busier and busier. So, like, you really have to be diligent in that hour and know what you're doing to be able to get the most out of that hour. You're also then putting the best rides at the beginning of the day. And personally, like, I mean, yeah, it's fun to have a really awesome ride at the beginning of the day, and I typically do that. But I like to have my best rides at the end. A lot of rides are better at night anyway. They're better in the dark. They run better because they're warmed up. And a lot of, typically roller coasters are more exciting at night. So that's another reason why I like staying till close. The thing is, when you stay till close, you have kind of the opposite of the situation that you have whenever you get there at opening. Typically, the park has thinned out substantially because a lot of people do get there early in the morning. A lot of people do get there when the park opens, and they're tired. They leave before, hours before the end of the day. Then you have the people that get there kind of a little after it opens or in the afternoon, which is kind of when I get there a lot of times. But they're done for the day. They're like, oh, I'm tired, I'm going to go home. So they leave. So really, like, the last hour of park, usually the lines are the shortest that they've been all day. I mean, I would say that a lot of times, and it depends on the park. This isn't true at all parks, but most of the parks that I've been to this summer, this has been the case. Usually those are the shortest lines of the day. They're usually shorter than they were in the morning. Except for, the very first ride when you walk on and get the very first train. It's usually the shortest lines. And you can get a lot done. The other thing, so here's the biggest reason why I think you get more out of the last hour than the first hour. The first hour, you typically have a rope drop where they kind of herd people behind some kind of rope or ribbon or whatever it is. And then they drop the rope, and I was talking earlier about the mob of people that you're stuck in. Well, you're stuck in this mob of people, and it's going to take you, depending on where the ride is, a lot of times, like, it's a ride that's far away, and it's at the back of the park, and you have hundreds of people going there at exactly the same time, or even if it's at the front of the park. Very rarely do you have a ride that is so close to the entrance of the park that you're pretty much at the queue whenever you walk into the park. It's going to take you a lot of time to get there because everybody else is going there, and you're stuck in this mob of people, and you have to walk slowly. Like, you have no choice. There's no way around it. Like, it's going to take you forever to get there. So when the rope drops, you're looking at the very least 5 minutes. At the very least 5 minutes before you get on that first ride. And 5 minutes doesn't sound like a lot of time, but 5 minutes will make or break your last hour at a park. You can accomplish a lot in 5 minutes at the very, very last opportunity that you have at a park at the end of the night. So talking about 5 minutes to maybe even 15, 20 minutes for you to really actually get that first ride at the beginning of the day. And, like I said, this isn't true of all parks. This isn't true of everybody in all parks, but at least in my experience, that's typically what happens. Is it takes you, probably on average about 10 minutes to get to the ride because there's so many people going to the ride. And yeah, you may still be the first person in the queue, but it just takes time for things to gear up. Whereas the very, very last 15 minutes of the park's operations, there's literally no line at all. Usually there's absolutely no line for a ride. And even if there is, most parks I've been to, they close the line for the ride at the time the park closes, which means if the park's open till 10, you can get in line at 9:59. And even if that line is 20 minutes long, you're still going to ride that ride. So basically, you're creating time at that point. Like, you're creating time that you're, I guess, technically not supposed to have to get another ride done. So rather than wasting 5 or 10 minutes to get to the ride at the beginning of the day, instead, you're gaining an extra 5 or 10 minutes after the park closes to ride a ride. So, I have literally several parks, even big parks that get really busy on a Saturday, in the last hour of the day, hour and a half or so. I've been able to re-ride, like, most, if not all, of the coasters, or get a substantial number of rides on a couple of them, or one that I choose. Sometimes I like to marathon rides at the end of the night. Just in that last hour and a half alone, because if you walk at a brisk pace, depending on how the park is laid out, you can usually get around it pretty quickly, and get on those rides that are typically walk-ons at the end of the night. And you can do a whole nother loop of the park, or you can do, like I said before, you can marathon rides and go, which sometimes is more efficient anyway, because if it's a ride that you really like and you want to ride it a few times and you didn't get a chance to ride it earlier, or you just wanted to ride it more, you can go to that ride for the last 30 minutes of the night. And in 30 minutes, you can get, depending on the line, 3 or 4 rides, sometimes even more than that. I'll give you a few examples. Dorney Park. I've gotten to Dorney Park an hour before it closed. And another cool thing about that, because I have the Platinum Pass, so like Dorney Park for me is on the way to Hershey Park. It's Hershey Park, Dorney Park, and Knoebels are kind of in a triangle. And so if I'm going to Pennsylvania, I'm usually going to more than one park. I'm usually going to Dorney Park and I'm going somewhere else, because Dorney is either on the way to or from either Hershey or Knoebels. So I stop there a lot. And excuse me. Dorney Park is kind of a medium-sized park, and in my experience, there's typically not really super long waits there anyway. But that being said, in that last hour of the day, I've been able to get a ride on every single coaster in that park, plus maybe an extra ride on a couple of them, or even 3 rides. Last time I did that at Dorney Park, I rode Talon 3 times. I finished the night on Talon. Usually what I like to do is I walk all the way back to Steel Forest and then make my way to the front of the park, if I'm going in right at the last hour. So I got in, at about an hour before it closed. It took me probably 5 to 10 minutes to get to Steel Forest. I did Steel Force, I think, twice, maybe even 3 times, because it was a walk-on. I went ahead and did Possessed once. I did Hydra once. And then I did Talon like 2 or 3 more times, because by the time I got to Talon, I still had 15 minutes or so left, and it was a walk-on, and you could just walk around and do it. The Six Flags parks, if you go to like Six Flags Great Adventure, is a good place to do this too. I usually go to El Toro at the end of the day at Six Flags Great Adventure, because 20 minutes before the park's closed, I've been able to get up to 4 rides on El Toro, which is absurd, because if you know that park, El Toro usually has, upwards of a 45-minute to an hour and a half or so wait on average, at the worst part of the day. And it becomes a walk-on, and you just walk around. At Six Flags, they'll let you sit on the ride. If there's nobody in your line, if there's nobody in your row when you get back to the station at the end of the night, they'll let you sit on your ride. So I've gotten, I think the most I've done is 3 rides on El Toro without even getting up from my seat at the very end of the night. And a lot of times what happens, this is another good tip, and I'll give another example for this in a little bit. A lot of time what happens is, they close the ride at the last minute, so you can get in line up to the very last minute of the day. If you time it just right to where you will be on one of the last trains of the night, don't get in the front row, because what's going to happen is everybody always gets in line for the front row. The front row always has a longer line than all the other seats on the ride, even if it's a ride like El Toro, where the back seat on El Toro is by far the best. Like, by far. Like, I think everybody would agree with me that's ridden El Toro in the back seat will agree that El Toro is by far better in the back. So why there's a huge line in the front? I always think it's funny, because I want to tell those people, like, you should just ride the back. It's better anyway. So what I'll do is I'll get in, not necessarily the back seat, because a lot of people are aware that El Toro is better in the back, and so there will be people that will get in the back seat of El Toro. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll get in the row right in front of the back seat, or even the row in front of that, because they have six seats in the train, so you're still in the back car. You're not in the back seat, but you're in the back car, which is, pretty much the same ride. I mean, it's the same car. And what will happen is, this will be like, at this point they close the line, so it's 10 o'clock, the line's closed, and basically what they have to do is they have to let everybody that's in line ride the ride, and there's always more people in the front, and depending on the park, like, they want to try to give people the opportunity to ride in the front. And so what will happen is you'll have a situation where you have 2 or 3 more cycles left to get through the people that are in line for the front, and they're stubborn and they don't want to move because they want to ride in the front. And at this point, the rest of the train has cleared out. Like, the rest of the station, the queues for all the other rows have cleared out, and so there's not going to be anybody in your row when you get back, and you just get to sit on the ride, because at Six Flags they let you do that. So, like, especially if you ride in almost the back row, but not the back row, a lot of times if you do get the back row, there'll be somebody there when you get back, unfortunately. And when you get in the station at this point in the game, like, you're in the station and you have 2 minutes until the park closes, then you can kind of count people and kind of figure out where in line you need to be able to do that. You have to take into account how many trains they're running, because if they're running 2 trains, you have to make sure that you're on a train that has 1 more cycle of people behind you, and not 2, because if there's 2 trains, you get on a train and there's 2 cycles of people behind you, then you're going to get off the ride. But if there's only 1 cycle of people behind you, you're good to go. Sometimes you want to do that. You want to make sure there is 1 cycle of people behind you, because sometimes if there's not, depending on what time it is, there will be people that come in at the very last minute and will get in your line and you didn't know that they were there, or they'll move from one line to another because now there's nobody in that line and they want to get in that line. But at this point, if there's only 1 cycle behind you, a lot of people will just go ahead and go to the row that's next to it, that's empty, and you'll luck out and you'll get that row that has nobody in it. Sometimes people will get up and they'll let you move seats. That depends on the park, it depends on the ride-offs, it depends on who's there. And then sometimes you get a situation where if you're the very last train, they'll let you cycle again. Like, if you cheer loud enough, or like one time I was on El Toro and it broke right when the park closed, and they still had to get everybody through the station. So they had a delay. It was like 10-15 minute delay before they got the ride back up. And at this point, everybody had been waiting, so they went ahead and just let the last train. We got another cycle, so I got an extra cycle even beyond that. At Hershey Park, I don't know if they do this on all the rides, but they do it on Sky Rush. At Hershey Park, rather than cycling the train over and over and over again to let the people in the front ride in the front, and they do this at the Six Flags parks. They will eventually, like, if the front line is to the point where they have to run 10 trains and there's nobody left in the station, at some point they're going to make people move to the other lines and fill out the other lines. At Hershey Park, they give you a choice. On Sky Rush, at least. I don't know if it's this way on the other rides. At Hershey Park on Sky Rush, there's usually like up to like 5 cycles of people left in the station waiting for the front row when the park closes. And basically what they do is they say, hey, if you want to wait for the front, you're more than welcome to wait for the front, and we'll send enough trains to let you go in the front. But if you move to another seat, we'll let you do 2 cycles. You can only do 2 cycles if you move to the other seat. If you ride in the front, you only get 1 cycle. And what that does is it lets people ride in the front that want to ride in the front, and everybody else gets a free cycle. And I don't know if they let you do more than 2. I've only ever done 2 when that's happened. So that's a good tip for Hershey. If you're at Hershey Park when it closes, get in the line for the front row of Sky Rush, literally like at the very last possible second, so that you are one of the last people in that line. And then basically what you do is they ask, people, okay, well, you want to move? You say, okay, and then you go ride in the back, which is, I think a better ride anyway. I like both the front and the back on Sky Rush. The front's a little smoother, but the back it's the back. So that's a good tip for Sky Rush. Really, this whole tangent is basically the idea that I don't need to get to a park when it opens. A lot of times it's better to get there a little bit after it opens because it's easier to get into the parking lot. It's easier to get into the park because you're not waiting in such a huge line. If it's a Six Flags park, you have metal detectors, so that takes even longer. Not all most of the Cedar Fair parks don't have them. Kings Dominion has them, but most of them don't. So I'm okay with getting to a park an hour or so after it opens. I think it's actually better. Which is another point too, like if you're going to get to a park, you have to be kind of aware of the situation of, how long it's going to take you to park and actually get into the park. So, I know it was kind of a long tangent, but those are actually some good tips and reasons why I like to be at a park at the end of the day rather than the beginning of the day, because you get more time. You get extra bonus time, basically. So I'll go back to talking about what I was originally talking about before, efficiency of planning trips. So, in the case of this trip, the parks are far enough away to where, like, I can't necessarily drive all the way to the destination and get to the hotel. Another thing, too, a good tip for picking out hotels and getting cheaper hotels is if you don't stay in a big major city. Like, if you're going to a park that's in like a major city, a lot of times if you stay a little bit further away, like even 30, 45 minutes away